Hello, and welcome to another episode of PC Politics Real, Raw, Relevant. We talk about issues that affect our community and how our elections at all affect us all. Right now, joining me is a candidate for the North Carolina Supreme Court, Superior Court Judge Lora Cubbage. Welcome to our show today.
Good morning, Phyllis. How are you?
I am wonderful, and thank you for being here. Before we go on and we talk about your background, I would like you, if you could first of all explain to us the structure of the courts, and what's the difference in the Superior and the Supreme Court.
Okay, so the structure of the courts, you have your administrative law courts. Those are courts that you're going to go to for Social Security issues, for workers' compensation issues, for those types of administrative law issues. Mm-hmm. Then you have your district courts. That is the courts where you're going to hear in criminal, you're going to hear your misdemeanors. In civil, you're going to hear your juvenile cases, your what we call DSS cases, your family law cases, mm-hmm. and then your any civil case where the amount being asked for is $25,000 or less. Then you've got your superior court, which is where I sit. That is called the highest trial court in the state. You have your criminal wise, you have all your felonies and your misdemeanor appeals. Then you have your civil appeals. Then you have your civil law cases where the amount being asked for is $25,000 or more. We also, when you see the redistricting and the voting cases that will end up on the state Supreme Court, mm-hmm. those start with 3 judge panels of Superior Court judges determining if what the General Assembly done is constitutional or unconstitutional. Then you go to what we call our appellate courts. Our appellate courts start with the Court of Appeals. If something is appealed from the Court of Appeals, it goes to the Supreme Court. The difference between your trial courts and your appellate courts is your trial courts hear facts of a case.
Okay.
So when all of your people that are not in the court system always want to know, well, what happened in that case? Well, you always going to look to your trial court levels, your district court and your superior court for that. Mm-hmm. When a case gets to the appellate courts, they do not look at the facts of a case. They do not review what happened as far as how the case got into trial courts. They look to see, what did the judge do? Is there anything in this case that has happened in the trial courts, the actions of a judge, that we can support the ruling and or the conviction, or do we need to overturn it because the judge made an error?
Okay.
So now what's important to understand is a judge can make an error in a case, but your appellate courts will determine, is that error egregious enough that it does not support the ruling or the conviction? Mm-hmm. If it is egregious enough, they send it back down. And they either say you need to have a new trial, you need to make more findings of facts. Judge, you let this evidence in that shouldn't have come in. You kept this evidence out that shouldn't have been kept out. It's always about what the judges did wrong when it gets to the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court.
Okay. And thank you so much. So what led you to get into the legal field? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, so I grew up in a military family, and my mother never worked. She was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was, of course, military. My mother also was an evangelist, still is. Grew up in that family, come from nothing, had nothing. Phyllis didn't even have running water till I got into the 4th grade. Graduated from high school, no money to send any of us. It's me and 4 siblings. No money to send any of us to college. Went to work. That didn't work out because I wanted, I'm a lifelong learner, so wanted to know more. My twin sister came to Greensboro, so I came to Greensboro. Went to barber school.
Okay.
Started dating a young man. He was a barber, very few women in barbering, went to barber school, became a master barber, cut hair for 17 years. Over those 17 years, more often than I wanted to, I'm listening to conversations and engaging in conversations with my clients where they've been in the justice system and things just went not right, seemed unfair and unjust. I'm always fighting for the underdog. So I want to know, what can I do to help these clients in the justice system? Mm-hmm. So I do some research, and I need to go to college. Then I need to go to law school because the goal was I'm going to become a defense attorney. Okay. So I stepped from behind the barber chair. I was a single mother, stepped from behind the barber chair, had to step out on faith because did not know how I was going to make that work. But I did go to A&T and got a degree there. And then I went on to UNC Chapel Hill for law school. And I interned at the DA's office. And I fell in love with public service law. So I never became that defense attorney that I thought I was going to be. I actually started off as an assistant district attorney. Then I became a defense attorney for the state as an assistant attorney general. Then I ran for district court judge and was successful. And then I ran for superior court judge and was successful. And so this is a natural progression to the Supreme Court. And so that's the background. They're solely a trial court judge creates what we call a record of appeal. That's why that court reporter sits in court. Okay. They're recording everything that goes on, and then they will determine what the judge did right or wrong. And if the judge did something right or wrong, of course, they make a decision to send it back down if it's error, or to confirm the ruling or the conviction. So being a trial court judge and having that experience is so important because the cases reviewed are coming from the trial courts. And right now, sitting on the Supreme Court, we have no one that's ever sat on a trial court bench. And so an overwhelming, more than 60% of what the Supreme Court reviews are criminal cases. And so you need a trial court judge that's actually presided over criminal cases, presided over trials, presided over those criminal trials, presided over those civil trials, that sat on these redistricting and voting cases in order to get up there, and when all 7 judges are talking about cases, that they can give that perspective and say, this is what happened in that trial court case. This is what this transcript means. This is what this ruling means. This is why the judge might have suppressed this evidence. This is why the judge might have let this certain evidence in. And it's so very important because Supreme Court is the court of last resort. So the buck stops there. And those trial court judges, we are changing the lives of people. And if the Supreme Court affirms that, I believe it is our duty to make sure that we're doing everything and have all the right people in place to make sure that when we say your life is going to be changed forever, that we at least have every perspective that we can. We're viewing it from every angle that we can. And we need a trial court judge on the Supreme Court to give that perspective. And I am the only candidate that's ever sat on a trial court bench.
Will you be on the ballots across the state, on all ballots?
Absolutely. I will be on everyone's ballot. That name is Lora Cubbage. And I'm going to stick this plug in that I am humbly asking for the vote of every voter. I'm even going to ask voters to do something a little different, and that start from the back of the ballot at the bottom and go up, because judges are so very important, but they do put us on the back of the ballot. And so I don't want anyone to go in and vote for president and think that they're done. You absolutely have to vote that whole ballot front and back, up and down.
Are these partisan races?
They are partisan races. In 2016, our General Assembly made judges declare a party and run in partisan races. So I will be on the Democratic primary ticket. And again, that's the whole government name. Lora Cubbage is what you'll see. And this primary will decide who goes from the primary to the general. And I believe I am the only candidate that can win this race in the primary and then in the general. And we know it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle for this Supreme Court seat in the general. And our Republican colleagues, they've started a long ago. And as we know, in 2020, when I ran for Court of Appeals, the Republicans swept, and then they swept again in 2022. Now, I will say this, in 2020, I was the last candidate to come out on filing day. I was the first Democrat, the first woman, the first Black to file on filing day in 2020. And I also was the top vote getter. So I know my electability. I know I resonate with the voters. My story resonates with the voters, my experience resonates with the voters. And so that's why I feel, and the numbers. Phyllis, let's just talk about the sheer numbers. The numbers will show the electability of candidates based across all factors, based across the experience and the electability. It even will break it. You can even see the numbers, regarding the race of each candidate. And candidates of color do well in election. And that's why that's one of the factors that I believe will help get me across the line in the general. Gender will help get me across the line in the general. Experience and expertise will help get me across the line in the general. So again, I believe I'm the only candidate for this seat.
You mentioned your website and you mentioned your social media. Could you give us that website, please, and your social media handle?
Yes, ma'am. The website is Cubbage, Cubbage, the number 4, ncsupreme.com. That's Cubbage, the number 4, ncsupreme.com. And then all social media handles are public, and all social media handles are Judge Lora Cubbage, or Lora Cubbage for NC Supreme Court, or Lora Cubbage for Judge. So you can Google Lora Cubbage and all those social media handles are going to come up.
Excellent. Before we go, is there anything else that you would like voters to know about you and about your business?
I would. So Phyllis, the last thing I'll say to the voters is you want a justice on your Supreme Court that has the expertise and the experience. And you also want a justice that can bring something unique to the Supreme Court that's not there. And then you also want a justice that has some personal experience with the issues so they can understand it from the inside out. I am the only judge and the only candidate in this race that has that. And that's why I say to everyone, I'm not just a candidate, rather I'm a stakeholder. Why am I a stakeholder? Because my personal experience, I'm a product of public schools. I'm a product of a HBCU. I'm a product of access to voting. I sit in a Superior Court seat now that the NAACP in 1987 fought tooth and nail to make happen so that we can have racial equity in our courts. I'm the only candidate that can bring racial equity. And we know our beloved Anita Earls has fought tooth and nail for the last year and a half on noting and calling out that there's no racial equity on our courts. I'm the only candidate that can bring that to the courts and make sure that we have a Supreme Court that works for everybody in North Carolina, that it reflects the diversity of our great state so that everybody knows that they're represented and their voices by way of these cases can be heard. I've lived through everything that's on the ballot. I lived in a community where I was one of the members that fought tooth and nail to fight the city from expanding a landfill that they already had in our backyard. So I know the environmental issues. I know environmental law. I have had to make a decision through a violation that was traumatic, had to make a decision about reproductive health, care and what I was going to do. And that, from being violated sexually. And that's something that I understand from a woman's perspective. I understand, of course, redistricting and voting. I've sat on those cases as a Superior Court judge, but of course we live that, right? It's our districts, the Black and brown community, whose districts get cut up and I went to A&T where they split that campus in half, and I was one of the proponents that helped fight to get A&T as an early voting site that happens this year. So I have the personal experience. I've been standing on the front lines for the last 18 years fighting for individual rights and liberties, making sure constitutional principles are upheld. For the last 8 years, I've interpreted the law and applied it. Again, I'm the only candidate with judicial experience here. And so I want the voters to understand that when they understand what the Supreme Court does and why this is so important. We have a voting rights and redistricting expert on the bench, and Anita Earls. She's the epitome of being an expert in that. What we do not have on the bench is a trial court judge expert, and I'm the only expert that can fill that seat. And so I want the voters to know that if we want change, we have to get to the polls. And so I have in my campaign what they call a 3-step process. That's donate, share, vote. Donate, share, vote. You must donate if you want change, because money equals messaging. And that's just the reality of it. If you want to help in this campaign, but you just cannot donate, then you absolutely can share. You can share my name. You can share my website. You can share my social media handles. You can tout me across the board, right? And then what you absolutely can and must do is vote. Mm-hmm. And I say to everybody, don't vote alone. If your car holds 4 people, you're driving, make sure those other 3 seats are filled. Take everybody that you can to the polls. We always say it's the most critical election, but Phyllis, that's because it's always true. And everything that's on that ballot, I represent, and I want to see come out in a fair, unbiased, and equitable manner. And in order to ensure that, I need the votes across this state to get me through the primaries. And so I want the voters to know that, and I want the voters to understand and look up. Here's another thing I want to say to the voters, if I can.
Okay.
I know that we're talking about redistricting and voting in this election cycle, because that's the message that the party has decided will hopefully fire up the base. But when it comes to that message is mostly for our General Assembly candidates, because what I want the voters to understand is in 2023, the Supreme Court made decisions on 895 cases, and only one of them had anything to do with voting and redistricting. One case. Mm-hmm. And that case then went to the federal courts, and our federal courts just held last week that they're not going to block those maps. Mm-hmm. And why that's important is because while that's the sexy talk and that's the stump speech for a lot of candidates, redistricting only comes up for the state Supreme Court once every 10 years. And then it's only one case. So don't let what we're going, our sexy talk of the election that we want to fire up the base make you think that when it comes to the Supreme Court, that's what the Supreme Court does a lot of. It's not even 1% of what the Supreme Court does. Overwhelmingly, the Supreme Court hears and reviews criminal cases, and then they review those civil cases. That's the next majority. And then we're talking about, then we have one redistricting every 10 years. We have one voting rights case every 3, 4, 5 years. So we need a trial court judge on that bench. And so, again, I want you guys to vote. I'm asking for your vote for Lora Cubbage on March the 5th.
And when does early voting start?
Early voting starts February the 15th. We know Democrats like to vote early. So if you can vote early, great, because you never know what's going to come up on March 5th. Get that vote out the way. Get your friends, get your family, even get your enemies if you know they're Democrat, and take them with you, right?
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. You have been listening to, and we've been visiting with Superior Court Judge Lora Cubbage, who is a candidate for the North Carolina Supreme Court. Thank you so much for watching PC Politics. I'm Phyllis Coley. I'm your host. And until next time, see ya.